Welcome everyone to AC's annual Mental Illness Awareness Week, Living with Mental Illness and Thriving. Today we have our keynote, Tyler Simmons, joining us. My name is Caprice and I am the Health Promotion and Education Coordinator at Health Services. And I'm thrilled to be your host today. We know that educating the college community on mental illness awareness is more important than ever. There is no health without mental health. So, Mental Illness Awareness Week is dedicated to teaching about, learning, and discussing mental illness and breaking down the stigma associated with it. To celebrate, we have a series of events available to all AC members to participate in. Now, before I welcome our guest, I have a few housekeeping items to mention. First, this webinar will be recorded, so if you miss any part of today's webinar, not to fret because it will be posted on the SSS website to be viewed in the coming days. Closed captioning is also available for use and may be activated at any time. To enable this feature, please select the CC icon at the bottom of your toolbar. Now, if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A tab, and please don't be shy, we'd love to hear from you. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tyler Simmons. Tyler is an award-winning filmmaker, mental health advocate, and expert. He is a Bell Let's Talk spokesperson who has the unique ability to spark creativity, hope, and inspiration in his audience. He shares his personal experience and his way of coping, living, and thriving with mental illness. We are so grateful to have Tyler kick off this important week, and we are thankful to have him share a story with us. Welcome, Mr. Tyler Simmons.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I wish that I could be there in person with everybody, but given the state of the world we're in, it has to be Zoom. Hopefully someday I can actually come in person and meet everyone. So my name's Tyler Simmons, and I'll just start from the beginning. I'm from Nova Scotia, Dartmouth, really small community in general, but it's the largest African descent community in Canada. It's called North Preston. And growing up, I've always been surrounded by a loving family. If I ever needed anything, I just lived right across the street from my cousins and my aunts and uncles. Everybody in the community knows each other. It's one of those types of communities. And growing up, it was always comforting being around that. Just a loving community and family. But also with that tight-knit community, it comes a lot of passed down beliefs from generation to generation. And so there's certain things that we didn't really talk about. Growing up, I always felt like I was different from the other kids. I felt very anxious and sad at times, and I just didn't know why. I tried to figure it out when I was younger. I would talk to my parents about it, and I remember that they would tell me that it was just a phase and that things would get better. But it took a really long time for things to get better. I always played sports. Those playing sports were that was very helpful for me to have that outlet. All of that pent up anxiety that I would feel and depression that I wanted to release. It was really helpful to play hockey and football. I played those my entire life up until my last year of high school. And when I got to high school, that's when things started to change. I started I started to get really frustrated with this anxiety that I was feeling. And at this time, I didn't really know what anxiety was. I didn't know really what depression was. I really just thought that there was something wrong with me. Um, and my parents were a great help, but unfortunately, they didn't really know much about mental health because it's not something that they talked about. It's not something that their parents talked about. Um, it's not something that anyone really in our community would speak about. The only references really that I had to go off of when it came to mental illness was watching movies, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and stuff like that. And I remember watching those. I'm like, yeah, that's not me. Yeah, there were a lot of these images that I would see in the media of what struggling with mental health looked like. A lot of movies that I would watch and didn't really portray it in a realistic way. Um, so it was really hard for me to talk about these feelings that I had. For a really, really long time, I just kept it all inside. And in high school is when I was starting to realize that keeping it held inside was really making it worse. And I had to do something about it. So I remember waking up one day and just thinking to myself, I have to do something. I can't go to school again and feel this socially anxious. I can't go to school again and feel just extremely sad. I need to figure out what's going on. And I remember I went to school that day and I went to the library and I Googled, why am I always sad and why am I afraid to be in groups of people? In every article that came up, it said things like social anxiety, depression. So I started reading these different articles and I'm thinking, oh, this is a lot like me. So I printed off these different articles. I took them home and I showed them to my parents. My mom looked over them and I remember what she said. She said, I have no idea what this is, but this must be really hard. And if you're bringing this to me, I believe you. You wouldn't just lie about this. So we're going to take you in to see your doctor and we're going to figure out what's going on. So that was the first time that I ever received help. I spoke to my doctor about it and he was really helpful. I realized that I wasn't just this alien that I felt like I was. I realized that there were other people that dealt with anxiety and depression, and even my doctor, he shared with me that he lived with social anxiety. So just that validation was so helpful to me. I didn't feel alone anymore. Um, but then the step came where I felt, okay, I know what this is now. I need to figure out how to get better. My doctor, he told me about different medications. He told me about yoga and meditation. He told me about mindfulness. He told me about things like affirmations and things that can help me build up my confidence and feel okay with living with depression and anxiety. As you can imagine, when he was first telling me these things, as someone living with depression and anxiety, I was really, it was really hard for me to take in. And I remember just thinking like, oh, so this is something that I can work on and actually get better at. So that mentality that I had with sports growing up my entire life, just practice and you can get better. I remember thinking to myself, I can apply this not just to sports, but I can apply this to my life. I can apply this to my mental health. I can apply this to the thoughts that come into my head, and how I learned about mindfulness and how that really can give you the opportunity to observe your thoughts without judging them, and then with practice and with work, changing them into more positive thoughts. So I went down this journey for years. I went down this journey of meditation. I started reading books on Buddhism. I started reading books on Taoism, and I started to learn that in other cultures, there are people who meditate all day. There are people who talk a lot about meditation and how it can help with depression and anxiety. So I read countless books on this stuff, and it was really hard at first, but I kept practicing meditation. I kept waking up every morning, meditating, and every night before bed, I would meditate again. And slowly I started to see changes. I started to see how calm it made me. I started to see how I could step back from situations that were stressful or situations that would cause me to become more anxious. I could step back and I could observe my thoughts, and without judging them, without being hard on myself, I could let them go. And it's helped me so much. When I was out of high school, I went to university for a year. I went to St. FX, and I started to realize that as much as I wanted to stay there, it just wasn't in my cards. I've always been somebody that feels a lot, and I've always been someone that is really artistic. My imagination is all over the place all the time. And with university, I was just feeling so much anxiety being surrounded by other students, and it was definitely causing a lot of depression. So I took this leap to leave university and become a photographer. So I started off being a fashion photographer, and I was in love with it. But then there was a moment in my life where things shifted. I was on this path of healing, this journey of becoming more mindful and meditating and putting more positive thoughts in my mind. And then just out of nowhere, something happened, and that was me losing my granddad. And as soon as I lost him, in my mind, it felt like a lot of that work that I was doing, it almost felt like it erased in that moment of time. It didn't, but it felt that way. It was hard. It's hard losing somebody. And those negative thoughts started to creep back in. That anxiety was so prevalent in my life, and the depression got really, really dark. So I was in this period of my life where I was thinking, do I want to be here anymore? if this is what my life is going to be, if I'm going to just keep going into this dark hole, which is depression, do I want to be here anymore? And from that moment on, everything started to make sense when I hit rock bottom. I hit the darkest moment in my life, but I like to tell people that it brought out the brightest moments of my life, because it was really dark, but I climbed out of it. And with climbing out of it, I remember I was just in my room all day. I felt like I didn't want to be here, but I kept trying to change my thoughts into positive thoughts. I kept trying to build up the courage to keep going. And hitting rock bottom, I feel it can do something to the brain. It can turn on a switch. And that's what it did to me. It turned on this switch where I thought, you know what, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to do all of those things that I was afraid to do. I'm going to do all of those things for other people that I wish someone would have done for me when I was a kid. And at the time, I remember I just kept having these strong ideas, these strong thoughts, and I brought them to my mom and I said, Mom, I want to be a public speaker. Even though I have social anxiety and I find it terrifying to speak in front of large groups of people, I'm going to do it. Because if I'm here, I'm going to do the things that I'm afraid to do. And she believed in me. And I told her these other things. I told her I'm going to write a book. I told her that I'm going to become a filmmaker. And these things, I didn't even try them yet. But in my mind, I was thinking, if I'm going to stay alive, I really, really want to live. And that meant doing those things that deep down I really wanted to do, but I was just way too afraid to do. And when I told my mom these things, I remember she looked at me and she said, you're going to do them. And she really believed it. And that brought some brightness to this dark moment that I was having. And I started seeking more help. I started finding a new therapist that could help me. I started seeing a mental health nurse. And before I knew it, I had this big support system around me that whenever I had a problem or whenever I felt discouraged, I could reach out to them and they would encourage me to keep going. They would validate my feelings. They would let me know that it's okay that I feel this way. There's nothing wrong with me. And I like for people to know that that's the truth. If we're dealing with a mental health struggle, there's nothing wrong with us. Especially right now with the given circumstances we're living in, it's totally understandable. But it's noticing that we're living with those painful feelings and keeping hope and knowing that there are people out there that really do dedicate their lives to helping people. And I had all of these amazing people around me, and they would just build me up over and over. And I started public speaking. That was my first step. I reached out to an organization that was putting on an event, and I just said, hey, I want to speak at your event. Um, and I can do it as a volunteer. This is my first time doing anything like this. And they said, sure, they let me come do it. And that's when I first realized the value in sharing your story. Because there are so many of us that deal with something. It can be depression, it can be anxiety, it can be OCD, it can be ADHD, it can be anything. It can be grief, loss, losing somebody. And we just need to know that we're not alone. And I remember that day when I did my very first talk, people started coming up to me and they started thanking me, even though I was so terrified when I did that first talk. Afterwards, they came up to me and they thanked me for talking about this. They thanked me for being a voice in my community. And I realized, oh, I'm here for a reason. I'm here to not just help people, but to be a storyteller, to tell authentic stories and to help people feel. So with that thought, I thought about those things that I told my mom, how I wanted to be a filmmaker. And my next goal was, okay, I'm going to make a film. And I reached out to a lot of people and I didn't really have much work to show. But I found this mentorship program. And the first thing that I said to them was, I just want to help people feel. I want people to feel what I'm going through in a way where they can feel it, but they get hope from it. They realize that I've hit this rock bottom, but I saw a light at the end of the tunnel. And I made that first film and I just put all of my heart and soul into it, knowing that people who are dealing with depression, anxiety, were going to see this, knowing that educators were going to see this, knowing that parents of youth who deal with mental illness were going to see this. And the same thing happened after I showed that film. So many people started coming to me and saying, thank you so much for talking about this. I remember professors coming to me and saying, oh, I finally understand what social anxiety is because I saw your film and then I went and did more research on it. And so many youth coming to me and saying, thank you, because I don't feel alone anymore. And from that day forward, I've realized that I have a purpose here. And I believe that we all have a purpose. And for me, that was looking at all of those dark moments in my life and those moments that were painful and unpleasant, and figuring out, how can I turn this into something beautiful? How can I turn this into something positive? And once I started doing that, my life just started changing. I began to make more films. I began speaking more. I did a TED Talk. I spoke at We Day. And the old me, the me that was in that really dark spot, would have never believed that I would be here where I am right now, ever. And I feel that a lot of people back then, they wouldn't have believed it either. They became like they're so surprised that I am where I am now. I'm now somebody that speaks openly about depression, anxiety, and living with ADHD and different ways that I cope with it. And I've gotten my community to actually talk about it, a community that never really ever would talk about something like this. Now I have people from the community that when they see me, sometimes they just tell me about how they're feeling, and I give them inspiring words, which is really, really cool, because growing up in my community, I grew up with a lot of toxic masculinity. I think that's around the world, something that men definitely deal with, and women definitely have their own set of struggles that they deal with. But with society, I definitely grew up being told things like men aren't supposed to be sad. Men, well, we can be sad, but we can't show it. Men aren't supposed to show vulnerability. We're supposed to just work, keep our head down, and we not really have time for feelings. Is sort of what I was taught. And I started realizing when I began to heal, when I began to feel better and do multiple events and make multiple films, I started understanding myself more, and I started realizing how important it is to be vulnerable, how important it is to let yourself cry, let yourself be sad, how that's human. And if we don't let ourselves feel those things, it will just bottle up, and the end result is never good. So now that's one of my big messages. It's even to young men, it's like we need to be vulnerable. We need to say how we're feeling, because there's so much toxicity in the world. There's so much pain. There's so much hardship, but there's also so much beauty. There's so much love, and once we focus on that love and that compassion, it changes things. It really does. I became this person that just lives in a way where I lead with love. If I just have a disagreement with somebody, if I disagree with the way that somebody views things, I lead with love now, because I am a firm believer that we all are deserving of love. And once we can love one another and genuinely care for one another and have compassion, even through all of our flaws, because we are human and we all have flaws, we can care about one another and have compassion for one another. That's how we can heal. That's how we can help the ones who are depressed. That's how we can help the ones who feel alone. Because loneliness is hard. I've been there. I know how that can feel. I know that it can be really dark. But when we have those people around us who say things like, it's okay that you feel alone right now. I understand why, but I'm going to help you through this. That's when we can heal. And that's when we can really truly help one another. There are there's so many things that I learned throughout my journey. I've learned these things about how the brain works. And I remember spending countless hours in my room reading books on psychology and reading books about mental health. And just realizing that no matter what it is that we go through, there's a way to get through it. And for me, those ways of getting through it, it's still a journey. Recovery isn't this straight line where you're at the finish line and everything's perfect. It's something that you need to practice. You need to learn to cope with these unpleasant feelings. And thankfully, I've learned to cope with these things. I do things like meditate every morning, every night. I go to a sensory deprivation tank where I lay in this big tank filled with salt and water. And I just lay there and I can't hear anything, I can't see anything. And it's just me and my thoughts. And it's like a really, really deep meditation. I do things like jogging. I do things like journaling. In the amount of help I've gotten from these things, it's huge. And that is really one of the main reasons why I speak to so many people about this, because I wish that I had somebody who came to me and said, oh, you can do these different things and they really will improve your mood. Like, they really will help. Because I remember those days where I felt like there was nothing that could help. So if you are in that position where you feel like there's nothing that can help, I want you to know that there are so many things that can help. There are things that we can do on our own, like the things that I just named. There are people that we can learn from, different books that we can read by people who have lived with depression, anxiety, people that talk about it. And then there are support systems of different therapists and mental health nurses and social workers and student support services and psychologists and psychiatrists that are really dedicated to helping one another. And it's no shame in asking for help. There's a lot of stigma that comes with mental health struggles. There are external stigmas, and then there is the internal stigma that I dealt with a lot. This feeling of, oh, does it mean that I'm weak if I'm asking to see a therapist? Does it mean that I'm weak if I feel like I need help? But that doesn't mean that you're weak. That means that you're strong. I think the strong people will stand up and say, there's something going on. I need help and I need to get better. And that courage, it takes a lot of courage, but that builds character. And the moment that you do that, you will gain this self-love that will help you do so many of the things that you were so afraid of doing. Remember when I first began feeling so much better, I remember saying things to my parents like, oh, now I want to go skydiving. Now I want to go bungee jumping. I want to do all of these things that I'm afraid of. And my mom wouldn't let me do any of those. But I think I'm old enough now where I'll just go and do it on my own. But it just gave me so much courage and so much self-love, and I'm in this space where I feel like there's not really much that I can't do now. And I really want all of you to know that there's not much that you can't do once you build up that courage. And it's hard. It's hard reaching out for help. It takes a lot of work to become more mindful and to turn those negative thoughts into positive. It does, but it's possible. It's possible for anyone. If it's possible for me, then there's no doubt in my mind that it's possible for you. And I want to end this portion off before we start the Q&A. I want to end this portion off just letting you all know that whatever it is that you want to do, it's possible through mindfulness, through meditation. If meditation is not your thing, you can do yoga. If yoga is not your thing, you can try isolation tank. If that's not your thing, just learn about mindfulness. In my experience, all of these things, they can help us get out of that anxious brain and see what's real. And what's real is that we're all just human beings on this planet, and we're all together. We all need each other. And we all at some point are going to be dealing with something. And nobody in this world deserves to go through it alone. So I also want to let you all know that you're not alone. Even with me, I try to make it a point to let people know. If you even want to send me a note, usually I will check it and let you know that I read it. I have a busy schedule, but that's what I love. I love being there for people. I think that's one of the main reasons why we're all here anyway. Community, being there for one another. It can truly, truly change lives and build confidence. And I want to thank you all for listening to me speak. And if you have any questions at all, please ask away, because I'm open to literally any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler, for sharing your story with us. It was fantastic and very, very thoughtful. It really makes you think about our own experiences and some of the experiences that we've seen our peers and friends and family members go through as well. So I'd like to start with our Q&A period. As a health promotion person myself, I've noticed that a lot of people find that mental illness is a challenge that we need to face on our own, that they don't like to share. And that's something that you mentioned in your talk. So, but we know that it's also critical to have social support in order to improve. So how do we start to share our challenges with our loved ones and the people that we trust?
Yeah, with my experience, it can be really tough to start talking about these uncomfortable feelings, which is totally valid. I think it would be uncomfortable for anyone. When I first started talking to my family about it, I remember they didn't really have an idea of what I was talking about. They were sort of like, Ty, I think you just need to go to church. And I'm like, parents, I don't know if that's what I need. And I started to realize that as frustrating as I would get when they would say that, I would get really frustrated with that. But I started to realize they just they didn't know about therapy. They didn't like that wasn't something that they thought about. They didn't think, oh, there are medications that can help. There's uh, like different practices that can help. Um, so their way was, oh, you just need to pray. And then once I started meditating more, it's really interesting because I started thinking, oh, this is similar to prayer. Um, and it became this thing where through lots of therapy, I began to understand where my parents were coming from and understand that they had their own way with dealing with their struggles, even though they didn't know the names to put on it. They didn't have these labels like depression and anxiety to put on it. I started to realize that they experienced a lot of these things, but they just didn't know how to talk about it. And um, it helped me have more compassion for them and be more patient with them. I think that that's really important when talking to family members about mental health struggles is being patient with them, because I like to believe I'm sure they're not ever maliciously giving advice. Sometimes it's not the greatest advice, but they just don't really know. um, yeah, I think just being patient and compassionate. Yeah.
Yeah, some people just throw anything at the wall and see what sticks. And sometimes that's just the case when it comes to mental illness. We have to try different things. Some people might not be into meditation, others might be more into prayer, some people may not be religious. So maybe it's their
Yeah.
own way of focusing on what is special to them. It could be writing, drawing, just a way of expressing your feelings if it's not personally than to others, but finding a way to reflect. And sometimes you need that soundboard, right? So we have a question in our Q&A tab from an anonymous person, pardon me. It says, how do you deal with stigma within the medical community? For example, with ADHD meds being a controlled substance, which can make them difficult to access. So again, the main question is, how do you deal with stigma in the medical community?
How do I deal with stigma in the medical community? That's a interesting question. Let me think about that. It can be, I don't want to go on too long about it, but I think as a person of color, I definitely want to share. It can be exhausting seeking help because of the cultural differences. And I remember when I first started looking for a therapist, my first couple of therapists that I found, they weren't for me. And I remember getting really discouraged about that with people in my community feeling that the way that they felt, and then me going in to see a therapist and them not really knowing the environment that I was around when I got home. I just didn't really feel seen much. It took me about 5 years to actually find a therapist that was really helpful for me, and it's still that person. Because even within that 5 years, I remember seeing certain doctors that were saying certain things like, oh, this medication that you're on, now that you're seeing me, you're not taking them anymore. And in the next few weeks, you come back and I'll tell you if you need one. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, wait, I need to taper off of this medication. Like this needs to be controlled. And some doctors were like, too bad, which was really discouraging and really disappointing. But I had to keep advocating for myself. I had to go and see other doctors, and which was really interesting. A lot of people can think, oh, if I see this doctor and they tell me one thing, that's just what it is. I'm not going to get another answer from another doctor. But I kept advocating for myself and saying, I need the help that I'm looking for. And I found the right doctors. And I remember seeing a doctor and them saying to me, oh, this is the medication that you're on? No, you are not going off of this, like just right now. You can taper off of it if you want to, but we're not going to harm you by just taking this away from you. And oftentimes through my research, it can be a struggle for people to even get the medication that they need, because sometimes there are certain doctors that believe a certain thing, and they're thinking, oh no, you don't need this. You can just do this type of practice and that will help you. But everybody's different. And I think just being firm in advocating for yourself and letting people know, this is my life and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make sure I'm okay. I think that is the most important thing.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And it's difficult because it's a collaboration really when it comes to mental health, especially in the medical field. And it's our hope that with this, the time that we spend talking about mental illness and mental health in general, that this information will be continuing to spread in the medical community as well, and there'll be a bit more understanding. So we hope that this stigma will decrease with time and we'll find more doctors that are able to help us and help the community as well. Yeah, we have another question here about Buddhism, and if you have any Buddhist books that you would recommend.
It's a great question. My favorite book is called the Tao Te Ching, and that's I can write it in the chat, but that's it's like a branch of Buddhism, and I got really into that because the first time I read that, I had some really extreme anxiety. And what Taoism teaches you really is that life is like a wave. The anxiety can go up, then it'll go back down. It's never gonna just be up, up, up. That's impossible. It's not how the world works. It'll go up, go down. And what Taoism taught me was that when I'm really anxious and it's going up, I need to make sure I have the supports around me that can support me while my anxiety is going up. Maybe my depression's flaring up. I have to have these supports that are with me on the way up, and it'll make it so much more comfortable while I'm there. And it'll make that wave go down a lot faster. And so now, after learning more about Taoism, I actually look at life more like a wave. It's like, just ride it, instead of just trying to push against it and splash against the waves, accept that it's going up and try to make it as easy as possible. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And it was Tao Te Ching, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just put that in the chat here. All right, I have another question for you. And for everyone, before I start with my other question, is you do have the option to post or pose a question anonymously, so feel free to use that option in the Q&A tab. My next one is some people, they, of course, at school, you're around your peers all the time, and even for your coworkers, you're around them now, it's virtual, of course, but we don't want to impose on our peers when we notice that maybe something is a little bit off, or this person that I care about seems to be struggling a little bit. But what would you say to a person who sees something but doesn't want to make the other person uncomfortable? You want to help, but you want to do it in a delicate way. What would you say?
That's such a great question, because it's so understandable, and I see it all the time. I worked at a organization for 4 years, where I was helping youth living with mental illness. And one of the things that I learned there was, instead of making that person feel uncomfortable, because not everybody is ready to talk about their mental health struggles. Not everybody is comfortable with it, and that's okay. But subtle things can help. Just letting that person know that they're seen. I remember a colleague of mine, once I saw that she was really stressed and really down one day. And I just sat beside her and I just brought my calm energy beside her. And I was like, everything's okay. We're good. You want to talk? In just that moment afterwards, she said to me, she was like, that helped me so much. Just the subtle things that we can do. Like, if there's someone at school who you see is not really talking to many people, and maybe they seem sad, just saying hey to that person, it can really change their day. Smiling at that person. Um, just those small things, I feel, are so important and get often overlooked.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's sometimes it requires the just knowing that there's someone there, and you don't have to be too obvious about it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But just making sure that you're known, that you have a shoulder that you can lean on and support your peers when you can, of course. We have someone in the chat saying, look to the quiet people in the Zoom classes, especially if they're not usually quiet. Yeah, that's a big one. I noticed in at times, there's some people who like to dominate the conversations, but yeah, of course, the people who are quiet do have something to say, and they may not just be ready to say it.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And some people find another question. Sometimes it becomes a habit to simply shut down and try not to feel. So quickly, before we end, do you have any tips on how to realize what you're feeling in the moment? And to not just say, oh, I'm just stressed, or oh, I'm just overwhelmed, but to really try and slow down and recognize and identify what you're feeling to help you cope with it or find a solution to it.
Yeah, that's a great question. With me, it's a journey. Something that I think, well, for me, I continuously am trying to work on. But as a filmmaker, I work on set like 12 to 13 hours a day. So as you can imagine, people get grumpy, people get stressed, and I'm still one of those people. I get stressed. I'm human. But I practice my mindfulness. I take a step back when I'm getting overwhelmed, and I think, okay, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? Am I working too hard? Am I straining myself? Am I feeling uncomfortable about something? And without being hard on yourself, just thinking about that, taking a step back, deep breaths, and thinking about that, and being silent, preferably being in a quiet space, and just thinking about that. And usually what I've found is that these things that are stressing us, these things that are causing us anxiety, that are getting us down, we can pinpoint them. And once we realize what they are, they become much smaller. I often have moments where I get really anxious or stressed, and then I realize what it is without judgment. I just look at it and I think, wow, I was that stressed about this thing that I can change right now. And then I just change it. And it sounds really simple, but because us as humans, we're often on the go all the time. And especially our brains is just on the go, especially with social media and everything that's coming in. If we step back, we take a deep breath, and we just observe, we can understand what's going on, and we can let go of a lot of that stress. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for your answers. This was a great time. And just one more opportunity for people to share their questions here. All right, I think that's it. All right, well, thank you so much, Tyler. It was a great opportunity to share your story, and I'm sure that lots of people were able to take something away from what you're able to teach us. So thank you again. And in closing here, I just want to, of course, thank you and recognize that it is every voice that mental illness awareness becomes recognized and supported. So we want to share your voice. We want to share the opportunity for people to share their experiences with others. Pardon me. Wow. They want an opportunity to share experiences and be able to reduce the stigma by doing so, of course. Please be sure to visit our Student Support Services events page, and you can learn more about this conversation. This webinar will, of course, be posted on there, and you will be able to see the chat as well. And thank you again, Tyler, for sharing your story, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you all so much.